Hi, this is Alan Olson, and welcome to American Dreams. I'm here today with Bob Regnier. Bob, welcome to today's show.
Thank you. Well, nice to be here.
So I recently met Bob at lunch. I moved back to the Midwest, and one of my first introductions was the founder of Blue Valley Bank. So there's a story here, Bob, that I invited you onto the show today, and I'd like to, for the guests here, to hear your story of how did you get to where you are today. And why don't we start maybe back through education? Did you grow up in this area?
I did. I grew up in the whole time in suburban Johnson County in Kansas City, and went through the Shawnee Mission School District. Went to K-State, Kansas State University in Manhattan. Came back to Kansas City and actually got my master's at UMKC as well. But I kind of came back and I was looking for. There is a humorous side to this story. My dad was a successful businessman and in the real estate business, and I did a couple interviews when I was at K-State, but I was going to go work for the family business, so I wasn't really didn't put my heart into it. And so I got back to Kansas City, and literally the next day, my dad said, he was kind of one of those greatest generation types that said, hey, as long as you're living in my house, you're not going to keep sleeping. So get up and let's go to work. And so I went to work. And so I started working for him. And, my dad was in the middle of building a building at that point in time. And he said, get into that ditch and start to clean it out a little bit because we got to pour footing a little bit later. And so I did that, and kind of muddy, and then rained a little bit, and it was just kind of nasty. And I did that day, and the next day, and the next day, and the next day, and finally, I told my dad, I said, Dad, I went to college, so I wouldn't have to dig ditches. And he said, Bob, you got to start there, and frankly, you're not doing a very good job of digging ditches. So, and I said, well, I may want to do something else because I don't know that I want to spend the next year working my way up to a job. And he said, fine, you could go ahead and work for whoever you want to work for, but as long as you're living in my house, and I was at that point in time, he says, you're going to go to work every day. So I'd get up early because my dad went to work early, and I would go out to a coffee shop for 30 minutes till I knew he was gone. Then I'd come back and go back to bed or get up. And I finally found a job working for as a welder. And then I eventually got a job working for a bank, for the Baltimore Bank. And so that was my early career. I worked for Baltimore for about 20 years. At that point in time, it went through 2 or 3 mergers, and I became I was in my last job with them, I was the EVP of Boatman's First National Bank, which is about a $2 billion bank. And they were going through another merger with another bank. And what they said to me was, hey, I want you to do administrative jobs. I don't want you to do banking jobs and make loans and work with customers, because I handled all their real estate and I did a lot of administrative duties for the bank. And I said, I don't want to do that anymore. I want to stay in banking. And so they said, we'll give you the opportunity to go do your own thing if you'd like. And so they bought me out. I filed for a charter, and Bank of Blue Valley came shortly thereafter. So that's kind of the long story of how I got into banking. And it was my first 20 years in banking at the Baltimore, which became Boatman's First National, was really instrumental. I had a great mentor. Like most of us in life, I was blessed with somebody that really cared and was really, really smart and trusted me enough that he gave me some running room and allowed me to do some things that probably, I maybe shouldn't have been allowed to do at that tender age. But it was a great first start, and gave me the training I needed to start the Bank of Blue Valley.
So the time frame, we're about 1989 at the founding of Blue Valley Bank.
That is correct. So it was.
I'm just curious, what was Blue Valley like at that time? That was some 30-something years ago.
Where the main bank is there at 119th and Metcalf, and it's on a that is one of the the busiest intersections in the entire state of Kansas. When I built the bank, there was nothing on that corner. There was all the buildings that are on there's actually 5 corners to that intersection, and all 5 corners were completely empty. There was a Quick Trip right next door to the bank that was built, and it was under construction when I started the bank. And I actually bought a piece of real estate and I put a double wide mobile home on it. So that was my first home for the first 4 years before I built the main building. But when you think about it, 119th and Metcalf was, which is an incredibly vibrant intersection now, was nothing back then in 1989.
It's interesting if we go back to nothing was really developed yet. Blue Valley today is known for the school districts. And what is the what's the history there, Bob? Were you involved at all with the development of the Blue Valley School District, or?
I wasn't involved in the development of it because it had gotten started, but it was kind of, at that point in time, it was just kind of emerging from being almost a rural school district. It was very small, and I remember having an issue. It was growing so fast. That area was developing, and it was growing so fast that they couldn't build schools fast enough. And I got into like most of us do, we are advocates for our children, and you don't. Somebody told me a long time ago, you don't have perspective when it comes to your kids. It's one thing that you're always looking out for the best. But I got into an issue because they were busing my child to a school that was a long way away because they didn't have room in the school that he was supposed to go to. And I went to the school district and I complained vigorously. And I said, you guys, I said, a third grader could do a better job of managing this than you have. And I was really pretty indignant at that point in time. But I remember he was very calm and said, Bob, you're a smart guy. You're well respected. He said, you need to get engaged with the school district so that you can provide some of your expertise. And I said, well, maybe I will. And so through a series of events, I got appointed to a committee that was involved with, actually how, the growth was managed. And I got to see firsthand how difficult those decisions were for a fast-growing district. And then subsequent to that, I was asked by a group of people to run for the school board. And I ran for the school board and won, and was on the school board from 92 to 2000. I was president for a couple of years. I was actually this is a kind of a interesting quirk. I was president of the only, and there's 300 school districts in Kansas, the only school district in the state of Kansas that had 7 women and 1 man. So, and I was the president at that point in time. It was a great school district, really engaged. I mean, the school district is really good and it has a great foundation, but the people I worked with were really great. These are all people that were passionate about education, and we got into a lot of engaged conversations. And I really feel like that 8 years that I did at that point in time were very helpful to me, but it's also probably some of the most rewarding public service work that I've ever done in my life. So it was good.
Well, Johnson County takes great pride in the school district that's been developed, and sounds like you were there from day one, helping lay a foundation and a pattern. I just curious, when you look back, is there something that you would attribute to the success of the Blue Valley School District and the reputation it has today?
Well, I don't know. That's a good question. First of all, we had some really good initial leadership.
Okay.
We had good boards. There wasn't a lot of there was a lot of vigorous discussion. But what we see today is more of a left-right sort of that kind of confuses some of the educational philosophy. And we really didn't have it back then. I mean, we had arguments about a lot of things. Frankly, we argued about books, we argued about curriculum, we argued about reporting to the parents, and we argued about boundaries and how to help the district grow. but we had a couple really good leaders in that early days. And frankly, the board understood that our job was to communicate with patrons, but it was also to hire the superintendent and leave the superintendent alone. And I think that's some school districts run into problems when they don't understand that process, because frankly, we had some bright people, good business people, a lot of individuals that were stayed at home and this was their job, and they spent 40 hours a week working on it. But everybody has to understand that education is it's a complicated process, and it has to be done right, and you have to lay a really good foundation. And I think to do that, you have a lot of frank conversation with your superintendent. But after you've had those conversations, you've got to step back and let him do his job. And if he doesn't do his job, you need to change and bring in a new superintendent. But frankly, we had 2 or 3 superintendents in a row that were just spectacular. So,
there's a saying: you teach them correct principles, and then you let them govern themselves. And
right.
And it was by no accident. I can see that the Blue Valley turned out to what it is today. Many school districts were growing in the same time period, but this one stands out. So thank you to you and leadership in past for what it is today. I want to move back to the bank, though. I have a few questions here. So, 1989, there were ups and downs in the whole banking industry, and starting out at that time, I'm sure there was a little bit of trepidation in terms of venturing out to do your own bank, especially in a double wide trailer.
Right.
What was it like getting your first deposit?
Oh, I actually I remember my first customer, which was really funny because it was a snowy day. I mean, it was cold. I mean, it had snowed. I was in this mobile home, double wide mobile home, and like I said, there was nothing on that intersection. So I look out the window, and there was just, there was 119th Street was there, and Metcalf was there, but that was it. And I mean, cars would go by, and we had the street that leads into the bank at that point in time only had the Quick Trip and us on there. And so I would sit there in my office, and we opened up at 7:00, and I kept looking at cars that turned in, and they would all turn into the Quick Trip, and they wouldn't come down to the bank. Finally, a car keeps coming straight and makes the turn. And I thought, oh my gosh, it's my very first customer at the bank. And so I got out and I recognized who it was, and I met him at the front door, and it was my attorney, and he was there to present his bill for the formation of the bank. But anyway, it was that was the first. But I had a good board, had a great board, some people that were very engaged in the community, and I empowered them to go out and make a lot of referrals to me. I had 20 years in the banking industry, and frankly, most of my shareholders, and this was maybe a little unusual because I didn't have any large shareholders. That point in time, there was enough kind of variety in the markets that starting a bank was kind of risky, and so I had some people that had 100, and I maybe had one guy that had a couple $100,000 in the bank, but but I raised a little over $2 million, about $2.25 million. But I had I met with all of my shareholders, and there were about 40 of them, 50 of them. And I said, you've got to help me. You've got to bring me referrals, and I will sell the bank. You just got to make the introduction. And they did a great job. We picked up, and frankly, I was fortunate that I was in an area that was growing. That whole intersection started to really come together, so it was good timing. You mentioned a little bit about that timing. It's kind of interesting because I think sometimes some of the most fortuitous things in life happen sort of by accident. But if you remember, the Tax Reform Act of '86, caused a lot of dislocation, a lot of problems with loans and those kind of things. Frankly, by '89, that all the problems were still there, but they weren't getting worse. So frankly, there really just wasn't temptation for us to do anything, highly risky at that point in time. And we were looking for bread and butter deals, and it was a good time to start a bank because rates were starting to move back up at that point in time, and we built a nice little base of business, and actually broke even our first year, and then made money every year after that. So,
well, therein is a story in itself. Not everyone breaks even the first year.
right.
When you set out with the business model, was there a certain industry that you focused in on?
Well, my dad was in commercial real estate, but prior to that, he had a 30-year record in the housing and residential construction. And so that was an area that, and the whole time I was growing up as a kid, I would get home from school, and my dad would pick me up, and I'd go clean out houses to get them ready for the carpenters the next day, to come back in. And so I knew a lot of people in that industry, and we did a lot of residential construction in that first 10 years, or really for the whole life of the bank for that matter. We did a lot of residential construction. So there was that. I did a lot of lending to the heavy construction industry, and I had 2 or 3 shareholders and customers that were excavators, bridge builders, those kind of things that did heavy construction. So I did some of that, and then frankly, anybody that from a commercial perspective that I knew that I could to do business with, we engaged. So it was fairly broad based, but the way the industry works, particularly for smaller banks, there's a lot of real estate lending, and that was something I felt like I had some understanding of.
Yeah. So Bob, when you not only were you involved with building a bank, serving on the school board, but there was also other aspects that you were involved with in terms of philanthropy and helping build the community. In fact, I believe there's several colleges that have buildings named after you. And what inspired you to get into doing that philanthropic endeavor when you already were giving so much into the school district and also to the business community?
Interesting. And again, like I said, as a tax guy, you would very much understand this. Again, I'd back up for a second. My dad was, came from real hard scrabble, zero. He had zero net worth when he got started, when he came out of the war in 1951, 52, and started building houses. So he started from absolutely zero, and was very successful. He was a hardworking guy that did well, but he was also a creature of the recession. I always talk about the Great Recession, of the Depression. And, he was in a family. His dad was a carpenter. His mother was a nurse. And they literally there were years when they would have to move 2 or 3 times because they couldn't pay the rent. So the Depression made a real, had a deep impact on him. And he always worried about going broke because of that, that experience. And as a result of that, my dad was really reticent to do any kind of estate plan. And, he built a very substantial net worth, and was very successful in developing first residential and then commercial real estate. And when, he was getting, when he ended up with cancer, and we started talking to his accountant and his attorney, and we were really in a heck of a mess because he was really at the end of his life, and he had done virtually no planning. And so we were faced with a situation. And I have a brother, older brother, younger sister, where we could have inherited what he had, with some fairly limited trust things put in place. But at the very last minute, it's hard to do anything horribly creative. But we would have paid an enormous amount of money in taxes. I mean, 8-figure tax payments. And so the one of the attorneys came back and said, look, there's an alternative to this. And we did several things that, created some tax advantages for us. But part of it a lot of it was giving a portion of his estate to a charitable foundation. And that charitable foundation with a charitable remainder trust and some other things allowed us to kind of keep things together and keep the organization going forward, but substantially reduce the tax liability. So really, when it came down to it, my brother and sister and I sat down and said, "Look, we can pay this huge tax bill, or we can take a third of what we were inheriting and put it into a charitable trust and reduce that bill by a substantial amount." And I'm very thankful that we chose the second of those two. And that was the start of the Victor and Helen Regnier Family Foundation. So,
well, the community certainly benefited from that. So,
yeah.
Bob, when you're looking at where you're at today, you a few years back you rolled up the bank into a much larger institution. Is that correct?
That is correct. Yeah,
Okay.
we ran the bank as an independent bank from 1989 to 2019, and then sold it to Heartland Financial, which is based out of Dubuque, Iowa, and merged it into that. They had a bank in Kansas City. We merged those two banks together, and we retained the Bank of Blue Valley name because it had a very strong reputation as a commercial bank and as a bank that was, a good connection for small businesses.
So, what's your next chapter in life? Life after banking.
Well, that's a good question, and my wife, would like to know the same answer. So, no, I kid about that, but we talked about it a lot, and my dad's business still is alive and well, and so I've been working pretty actively with that because there is real estate that has to be redeveloped. Some of his real estate is 50, 60 years old, and so we're just finishing a very, very large renovation of a shopping center that was his very first shopping center, actually, and so I'm working on things like that. But the other thing that I've been involved with a lot of charitable things in the past, but a lot of it there was a connection to the bank in one form or another because he was either the bank customer or there were people that I was soliciting for banking business, and they were all good charities, but they really weren't my passion, and my passion, I think I've discovered, is affordable housing, and I'm talking about affordable housing, housing, ownership, so I have spent a fair amount of time in the last couple of years working with several CDFIs in Kansas City and organizations that have concentrated in the housing industry and trying to help create affordable housing for sale to for individuals. And so I'm working with 2 or 3 organizations helping them. There's another individual and I and some other friends that have gotten together, and we've started a little company, and it's our goal to build 10 affordable homes in Kansas City, Missouri, over the next 3 years. And so we're going to put our toe in the water there. The one thing I've learned about that process is it's exceedingly hard. And matter of fact, I don't want to say it's impossible because people are accomplishing that. But I was talking to a fellow the other day, and he was building a house that's in a little bit more of a gentrified neighborhood that was closer to Crown Center, and so it's a little bit more expensive area. But the house he was building, I thought was kind of pedestrian, and it was nice looking, and it was new, and it was very nicely appointed, but it sure wasn't anything super special. And I said, "What are you gonna ask for the house?" And he said, $600,000. And I said, "That's not affordable housing. That's upper end housing. I mean, you're going to take. You need a professional to be able to buy that house, and that's not my goal. My goal is to try to help people build, own their first house. And there are programs out there through the government and through the states that allow you to do some down payment assistance and get, better loans and that kind of stuff. But, that's the problem is that, I think to build a house, it has to be at the $300,000 level and below. Really, you'd like for it to be at $200,000, but it's very difficult to build a $200,000 house. But that's gonna be my experiment. Come back and we'll talk in 3 years, and I'll tell you whether I was successful or not. Because we may be just spectacularly unsuccessful. I know one thing: we will build 10 houses. We're committed to doing that, and we're going to do them and build. And these are not going to be really not good-looking houses. I want something that people can be proud of, because that's what. And you know this from your tax background and your financial planning background. For better or for worse, generational wealth is created by real estate. And a lot of people, a lot of minorities, a lot of people have just, lower means have just not had the ability to buy their own home. And when you can buy your own house, and if you're diligent and you do a good job, you end up building some equity. You might even go to a bigger house, but you build generational wealth. If you're a renter your entire life, it's really difficult to do that. And it's a long answer to a very short question, but I really feel like, if we're talking about helping people move up and building, building a stronger base of people in the United States, I think we need to help people on that side of the ledger.
I love it. Well, Bob, it's been a pleasure having you with us today.
Thank you. It's been my pleasure completely, and I look forward to getting to know you better as we meet other people in Kansas City, and I think it'll be a great opportunity. We appreciate the fact that you're back in Kansas City, and you're also a customer of the Bank of Blue Valley, and I'm very thankful for that too.
Thank you, Bob. Thank you. Been visiting here today with Bob Regnier, the founder of Bank of Blue Valley, and thanks for joining us here on American Dreams.